Boom. So we got to start with some Mingus. I picked two really great ones. And of course, whenever we do these shows, Chris, I always have to go back and like refresh my memory on these records. Some of them don't need refreshing. This is one of them, but I had to listen to it anyway. It's just fantastic, man. This is Mingus, which I'm going to call Mingus times 5 for the rest of the time I'm talking about this record. But this album kicks off with a fantastic tune, man. And it could easily be dropped in any soundtrack, any like a 50s film noir starring Paul Newman, James Dean. I mean, it's bluesy, it's swinging, it's frantic. It just has that energy that Mingus always brings to his compositions. I say always, he's very diverse, but when he kicks into some of these high energy compositions like that, like this one kicks off, it's just awesome. You know, Mingus, to me, I should say, I think of Mingus as a composer and as a storyteller. Yes, he's a bass player. Yes, he's a band leader. Yes, he's all these things. But for me, his compositions are second to none. I put him in the top 5 of composers in jazz, and a storyteller in the sense that his compositions really do tell stories for me, and his albums really tell stories to me. The way they're sequenced is very meaningful. I mean, they're just packed in a way that is as a story arc to me, as much as you can do a story arc with jazz music. And that is one of the things that I really appreciate about Mingus. That's why I put him at the very top as the GOAT. Another one's Theme for Lester Young, another beautiful piece that's much more kind of chilled out in tempo, not like the first track on here. Has a great vibe. It just really spotlights Mingus's gift as a composer. It's such a great composition. Drop the needle on Theme for Lester Young. It's fantastic. And kind of, I'm going to do two, so I'm going to try to go quick here. But my final thoughts on Mingus times 5 is, like I said, I mean, it's a musical novel to me. It has peaks, valleys, drama, intensity, emotion. And it's just one of the great jazz albums of all time. And a lot of people that don't know a lot about jazz and maybe heard of music probably already recognize this cover or have heard this album. And for good reason. It's just a fantastic record. And then my second record has 2 titles. One is Jazz Portraits, which you see right there. But it's also known as Mingus in Wonderland. This one was put out by United Artists. And it's actually a very similar album to the last one, except on this one, we get very extended tracks, which I'm a huge fan of, dude. I mean, you got 12-minute Nostalgia in Times Square. You got 10 minutes on I Can't Get Started. You got 13 minutes on No Private Income Blues. You got almost 9 minutes on Alice's Wonderland. And I love when guys can just kind of stretch out and really kind of, I don't know, just like, they don't feel so cramped. It's not a 3-minute tune. Like, these guys get to really do their thing over an extended period of time. Nostalgia in Times Square is one of the big ones on here, if not the big one. Including, and I have to call out John Handy on alto on this one. He is so freaking great and creative. As soon as you hear him come in on track 1, it's just super fresh. It's fantastic, has technique, is nails. He's already in the first bar just telling you exactly who he is, man. And so that track is phenomenal. And then I also like No Private Income Blues, another fast tempo, swinging track. Mingus opens with a bass solo on that one, really demonstrating how strong he was as a soloist, because he is an incredible bass player too. And so final thoughts on this. I mean, every track actually on both of these records is just a clinic in jazz composition. Yeah, I'd say like traditional bass playing in the sense that some of these other guys are really more sort of avant-garde, but just a phenomenal couple of records, man. A nice little twofer. If you want to just jump into Mingus, some of his other stuff, like I would put The Clown in there, put the Canthropus Erectus, and some of the other stuff Saint and Sinner Lady can be, at least in my opinion, it's almost like a stage 2 entry into Mingus. I just feel like with Jazz Portraits and Mingus times 5, they're just great entry points. So, all right, that's it, man. That's the GOAT right there. That's all I got, Chris. What do you got, man?
I didn't want you to stop, but I share the same opinions on Mingus. I mean, when I look at why he's the greatest, it's beyond the playing ability. It is the composition. And you know, when I think about my holy trinity of jazz being Monk, Coltrane, and Miles, I feel like Mingus is the protector of that world, right? He's kind of the bouncer or the bodyguard. When I was
literally and figuratively.
Yeah, exactly. And you can hear in the music. So the first record I'm going to show, this is my favorite Mingus record. I'm going to show a nice reissue of Mingus Blues and Roots.
Ooh.
And then I even have a mono reissue of this record. Blues and Roots came out in 1960, I believe, maybe 61. Really gives you a sense of Mingus as a composer and kind of a mood setter. This is a very contentious record. It's very vibrant, has a lot of elements of traditional jazz. It gets a little funky, gets a little fuzzy, a little garage sounding at times. Very intense record. And there are a lot of great entry points to Mingus, but I always recommend Blues and Roots to people. This is just one that is completely electric from front to back. For you, Jason,
that's the thing about a lot of Mingus's work is you're almost doing him an injustice if you do call out one more than the other, because it, kind of takes away from the whole experience, which is an album. I mean, like I said, it's a novel. You're not just going to read the first chapter or the third chapter. You got to read the whole thing, man.
100%. And what I love about this record specifically is it's a huge band. I think it's an 8 or 9 piece band on most tracks. Jackie McLean's on this.
Ooh.
I know he's one of your personal favorites. He absolutely crushes it. And there is an element of improvisation on here that's kind of sketched out as you go through the album. Mingus Blues and Roots, for me, this is the entry point to Mingus that everybody should come into. This is the way I got into him and became my favorite Mingus album over time. Obviously, so many other greats. The second one, Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, which you brought up as kind of a high entry point into Mingus. But I'm glad you mentioned his ability to be a storyteller and almost lyrical in his music, even though it's instrumental for the most part. This is almost like a ballet or a musical of sorts that really tells the story of one's life. And if you ever get a chance to read the liner notes on this album, it's pretty remarkable. Mingus has a quote. I don't have it memorized, so I'm going to read it off my notes here. This is my living epitaph from birth to the day I heard Bird and Diz. So he's talking about Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. So this is kind of his journey through life until he, found those artists. And that's the inspiration for this album. This is one of those albums, like when I spoke about Mal Waldron's The Quest last week. This is one of those albums where you get the imagery and the scenery in your mind. I'm picturing just like a smoky jazz club, maybe in the 30s or 40s, just being exposed to that scene and all the hoopla around it, and maybe the pain and joy that came with, being in those situations. But yes, this is level 2 Mingus from an accessibility standpoint. I agree with you on that, Jason, but this is just a really fun record once you enter the world of Mingus to get into. As you get deeper and deeper into Mingus, I think one of the things he doesn't get credit for was his adoption and ability to move with the times in his own style. And it's such a smooth transition through all these different styles of jazz. I think that, even the greats like maybe Train or Miles, they had this, I want to say, deliberate pivot to a new sound. And I think Mingus, being a bit of a traditionalist and a composer at heart, I think he was just able to be a trendsetter and keep the roots of the music and the blues and New Orleans and Afrobeat and things like that, Afro-Cuban beat. I think he was able to keep that in the music, which is an important piece of it. Speaking of intensity, one thing I should mention is most of Mingus's albums are extremely intense and contentious, both in sound and in spirit. And this album, this was just reissued as a tone poet. There's a lot of history on this record. It's a trio. It's Duke Ellington is, I guess, considered the leader on this on paper. And then you have Mingus and Max Roach. And there's a lot of conflicting stories about this record, but this album was recorded with a lot of drama and controversy in the studio. I think a lot of ego and temper came about. And what's really cool about this record, Money Jungle, is you can really hear it in the music. You can hear these guys dueling. You can hear some anger. You can hear some intensity. And to me, what's also great about this record is Mingus in a trio, in a small band, is just as boisterous as some of his larger ensembles when he's with 6, 8, 10, 12 people on a really big soundstage. So yeah, it's just a really great record with 3 greats and 3 greats at the time. And I think, Max Roach, similar cultural influence that Mingus had, conflicting stories. They had to pull Mingus back in the studio. Ellington had to chase him out. Then there's stories that Max Roach had left the studio. So definitely recommend this record. It's easy to get now that they've reissued it, and it's a really good listen.